Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bhargava, Chandana, all of you assembled here. It is indeed a great honor to be invited to deliver this lecture at the invitation of the PM Bhargava Foundation. I would like to think of The Wire, the publication that I now edit, as our own small, insignificant contribution towards enlarging two critical components, two critical constituents of the public sphere that Professor Bhargava, in his work and his life, has contributed so much to, namely civilized, reasoned, and rigorous debate on public policy, and the importance of science literacy and a scientific temper. Professor Bhargava has also been a great builder of institutions, and never has it been more important for us than now to understand the place of institutions in the life of a country, especially educational institutions, especially institutions where young people, the future of this country, come to gain knowledge, to debate ideas, to argue with each other, and to reach their own conclusions about which direction and how and where this country ought to be going. Ladies and gentlemen, when it is customary to speak about the idea of India in singular, many of you must be wondering about my use of the plural ideas in the lecture, in the title of this lecture. Is it a typo? Some of you may have asked. Or maybe those of you who don't know me well enough might have thought this is a covert attack on the idea of India that all of us in the city have grown up with and love. The idea of composite culture, the idea of secularism, the idea of democracy, the idea of social justice. In fact, the title that I chose, The Ideas of India Plural, is meant to underline the importance of the plurality and diversity of thinking, writing, culture, and other forms of human creativity and expression, as well as the different modes of worship and lifestyle that have evolved over millennia in India and continue to enrich our country today. In my view, all of these ideas of India are valid and legitimate, whether we like them or agree with them or not, as long as these ideas do not impinge on the rights of those who do not share them. Of course, the existence of ideas in the plural presupposes contestation, and this is also a must. There will be multiple ideas of India. These ideas will contest and argue with each other. But how should the contest take place? What are the rules of the game? This is the crux of the matter. If you look at India today and look at the way we've evolved over the last decade or so, it is easy to pay lip service to this diversity that we all love and affirm one's support for it. But what matters in reality are one's deeds. It is not uncommon to find some people in India who simultaneously celebrate the openness and plurality of India as the product of its so-called Hindu essence, while at the same time conspiring to rid the country of this very same diversity. Today, we are at an inflection point as a society, and I use these words with great responsibility. Are we going to stand by our diversity of thought and use debate, reason, and science to resolve differences of opinion? Or are we going to take resort to the strong arm of the law, to violence, to abuse, to hectoring? Are we going to let the people of India debate their ideas of India? Or are we going to insist that there is one and only one idea, and that people who do not agree with that idea, or who argue with it, or who want to debate it, are all anti-national and deserve to be arrested and jailed, or even attacked and killed? This is the choice that faces us today. In a major intervention at the end of a parliamentary debate last year on intolerance, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a conscious effort to define the idea of India through no less than 18 shlokas and aphorisms. There was one reference to a South Indian source, Adi Shankara, one to the Buddha, and two to the great Gujarati Bhakti poet Narsingh Mehta. The other 14 were drawn more or less from the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Manusmriti, and similar scriptures. Leaving aside the Prime Minister's somewhat curious inability to come up with any ideas of India from India's other religions and India's other regions, the question we need to ask is how to reconcile these wonderful, if somewhat pious, declarations with the reality of what has been unfolding across the country over the past 18 months. And let me focus with a detailed illustration and discussion of the one event, the one incident which has shaken many of us across the country and has animated public debate in the last 10 days, which is what happened in Delhi, the national capital, on Friday, February 12th, and then again on February 15th and February 18th. I'm referring, of course, to the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar, president of the Jawaharlal Nehru Students' Union, University Students' Union, on charges of sedition. And, of course, the shocking and disgraceful manner in which lawyers who are meant to argue in favor of the law set upon him violently at the Patiala House courts, and the manner in which the Delhi police, which had a constitutional duty, and on the second day a duty that was reiterated by the Supreme Court of India, stood by as a mute spectator while goons tried to tear him from limb to limb. In my view, the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar on charges of sedition marks a dramatic escalation of the undeclared war which has been waged in one way or the other over the past decade, not 18 months, over the past decade and more, against the culture of democratic dissent in this country. The incident that triggered the arrest was the alleged chanting of anti-national slogans by persons unknown at the university campus. Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh announced on Twitter that he had ordered the Delhi police to take, quote-unquote, strong action against the anti-India elements. Human Resource Development Minister Smriti Irani, who is supposed to be in charge, as it were, of all universities in this country, such as JNU, celebrated the police raid on the university campus by saying that the nation can never tolerate an insult to Mother India. Now, whether the Home Minister likes it or not, whether the HRD Minister likes it or not, there is no law in India which bans speech that is, quote-unquote, anti-national. There is also no definition in the statute books for what constitutes an insult to Mother India. There are 400 universities in this country, and thousands of student groups hold small and inconsequential meetings every day, where a lot of what they say in those meetings may not be palatable or in good taste. Ms. Irani may think that the slogans that those students allegedly shouted at JNU were an insult to Mother India. I also happen to think that those slogans were an insult to India and the Indian public. But I also think the statement of the Haryana Chief Minister that Muslims can stay in India if they stop eating beef is an insult to Mother India. I also think the statement Rajiv Gandhi made in 1984 as Prime Minister of this country, at a time when the city had just witnessed the genocide of Sikhs, organized by goons from the Congress party with the complicity of the police, that when a big tree falls, the earth is bound to shake. This statement was also an insult to Mother India. I think it is an insult to Mother India when people associated with the party of the Prime Minister call non-Hindus haramzade and question their Indianness. Unfortunately or fortunately for all of us, there is no law that criminalizes bad taste or the absence of ethics and morals in the people who govern us. Of course, the crime of sedition still remains on the statute books. However, as the courts in India have repeatedly ruled, from Kedarnath's case in 1962, or even earlier, the Ramesh Thapar and Brij Bhushan case of 1950, down to Balwant Singh's case in the 90s, and Asim Trivedi, slogans and speech, however distasteful and odious they may be, cannot be considered seditious under Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code unless they involve the direct and imminent incitement of violence against the government established by law. In the case of Balwant Singh, which offers us the closest parallel to the JNU incident or the JNU event and the slogans that were alleged to have been shouted, the accused was convicted of sedition by the lower courts for having shouted in a crowded marketplace in Chandigarh in 1984 shouted Khalistan Zindabad, and that Hindus will have to leave Punjab. I think these slogans, in terms of their essence, are not very different from the slogans that the Delhi police says were shouted by some of those who attended the meeting on Jammu and Kashmir in JNU on February 9th. But the Supreme Court said that it is not enough for Balwant Singh to have shouted Khalistan Zindabad or to have said Hindus must leave Punjab if what he shouted and those slogans and what he said and did not involve the incitement of violence. And if you think about this, ladies and gentlemen, how can it be any other way? In any event, Kanhaiya Kumar is not accused of shouting those slogans, nor was he an organizer of the event where these slogans were allegedly shouted. If he is to be accused of not doing enough to stop inflammatory or distasteful utterances from being made, the same charge can quite easily be laid at the door of senior BJP leaders who have done nothing to end the stream of incendiary, anti-national invective from sundry party and Parivar activists. In the absence of evidence on hand to sustain the charge of sedition against Kanhaiya Kumar, the Delhi police has been on a desperate fishing expedition. A full 10 days after they arrested him, they finally issued a notice to Zee Television asking for the original chip and camera where the supposedly seditious slogans were shouted. And still they have nothing in hand to sustain the kind of dramatic charge that they have leveled, least of all if you consider the continuous manner in which the Supreme Court of India has defined sedition from the 1960s onwards. Now, I must confess that I had never heard of Kanhaiya Kumar until the police chose to arrest him. And I dare say many of you in this room perhaps also had not heard of him. Like you, I too went online to try to find what I could about this person who is supposed to be a notorious anti-national, a notorious seditionist. And I came across videotapes, video recordings of the speeches that he made. So those of us who actually tried to look for evidence of the grave police charges against him have instead discovered a vibrant young man who is anything but the anti-national that the Home Minister of this country accused him of being. I challenge you to watch video recordings of his speeches and not come away with the feeling that young Kanhaiya has a better political sense and greater command over language than most of our national politicians and certainly most of our journalists. You don't have to agree with his unabashedly left-wing politics or his pungent criticism of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh to recognize his passion and commitment to the people of this country. As a member of the All India Students' Federation, which is incidentally the oldest extant student organization in India, and an affiliate of the Communist Party of India, which has fought more elections, more general elections than any other party in this country other than the Congress. It's actually fought the same number of general elections as the Congress Party, and no other party has fought more of them. As a member of this organization and party, Kanhaiya Kumar could obviously not support the demand for Azadi or the independence of Kashmir. Anybody who is even vaguely familiar with the political stand of the CPI will be able to tell you that. But if you listen to his speeches, you see that here is a young man who has the wisdom and political skill to know how to converse with the advocates of that cause and to seek to channel the demand for Azadi that some of them raise into the wider struggles for dignity of the people of India. For Kanhaiya Kumar, Azadi is the freedom for which all of India's people yearn. If you've seen one of the speeches that the media tried to distort, Azadi for him is Azadi from hunger, Azadi from feudalism, Azadi from communalism, Azadi from casteism. Like Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who put aside a narrow constitutionalism in order to talk to the advocates of Azadi in the Hurriyat conference when he was Prime Minister, Kanhaiya's politics on campus embraces insaniyat and insaf. He is a patriot who knows his India is not so fragile that it will break into 1,000 pieces just because a handful of people on campus shout provocative slogans. If you listen to what has now become his most famous speech, the speech that television channels maliciously tried to distort in order to suggest, in order to sustain the police charge of Kanhaiya being quote-unquote anti-national. What was he doing there when he says, Azadi, Bhukmari se Azadi, Samantwad se Azadi? In my view, by anchoring the idea of freedom in rights that belong to all Indians equally, he is doing more to secure the future of the country, including its territorial boundaries, than those who treat every political challenge to the state as a military threat. Kanhaiya was challenging the superficial attraction that secessionism might have in Kashmir or elsewhere in a far more effective way than the state, which doesn't seem capable of thinking beyond the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, sedition, and other purely coercive methods. Ladies and gentlemen, Mother India, or more precisely, the Union of India, and the government established by law are resilient enough to withstand slogans and speeches raised by disgruntled citizens, regardless of whether they speak against the basic structure of the Constitution by advocating the independence of Kashmir or the establishment of a Hindu Rashtra. regardless of whether they choose to venerate a convicted terrorist like Afzal Guru or a convicted terrorist like Nathuram Godse. It is only when individuals move from mere speech to the direct advocacy of violence that they ought to run the risk of legal sanction. In a democracy, it cannot be any other way. There is, however, a perversity in the manner in which this rule operates in reality. If you peacefully raise your voice, shout slogans, advocate the political line that is uncomfortable to the government of the day, no matter who the ruling party is, chances are that action will be taken against you, even if you are not involved in the advocacy of violence. And there are numerous examples of this. On the other hand, if you do resort to violence, as long as the demands that you raise as part of your use of violence can be somehow co-opted into the wider politics of the establishment, then no law will be used against you, even when there is a fitting case to prosecute such people to the fullest extent of the law. This perversity, where free speech, or the quality of free speech, or the timbre of free speech, is colored by or is affected by the political biases of the establishment, has produced a highly toxic environment in which people are increasingly afraid, even in small gatherings, to speak what they truly believe in. And Amir Khan, or people like him, when they make statements, matter-of-fact statements, relating a conversation that took place in the privacy of their own home, but in a gathering where you share, the purpose of which is to share the kind of concerns that husbands and wives, families in this country, rightly or wrongly, feel, can be vilified, pilloried, his character can be assassinated, his patriotism can be impugned, because you raise questions that are uncomfortable to the ruling dispensation. But an O.P. Sharma, who is an MLA in Delhi, can be captured on camera physically beating Ameek Jamai, who is a young CPI leader, in front of the Patiala House courts. You have actual footage of this, and it takes 4 days for Delhi police to register an FIR about his resort to violence. The same O.P. Sharma, who took an oath to uphold the constitution, gives a statement on camera that if he had a gun, he would shoot and kill people who supposedly shout pro-Pakistan slogans. And when this line of his is related to a BJP spokesperson on national television, and the spokesperson is invited to condemn what his party MLA has said, the spokesperson says there's nothing wrong in what he said. So if you are a BJP MLA, or you support the system, and the same would have been true incidentally. This is not a BJP or Congress issue. In Congress times, Congress people could say the most god-awful things, and the law would never catch up with them. But today you can say it's okay for somebody to kill a person. You can have an MLA advocating murder in front of a camera. He hasn't withdrawn the statement. He hasn't said, like other politicians do, that I was misquoted or my view was taken out of context. In fact, I assure you that if you go to talk to him today, he will happily repeat that statement. But no charge of incitement is laid at his door. No charge of sedition is laid at his door. Lawyers who attacked a court, which is a symbol of the Indian state. In my view, this is a fit case for attracting the provisions of 124A. Somebody who through words and deed is attempting to overawe the state. What is the state without its symbols? if you're going to attack a court, can there be a more seditious act than that? But because these lawyers owe their allegiance to those who are in power, the police says we can't identify who they are. A very lukewarm, tepid FIR is registered after days of protest. And you know as well as I do that that FIR will remain a dead letter, no action will be taken. In the past decade, we have seen, and I want to underline the fact that this is not a problem of just one government or just one party, even though it's natural that we speak of the present. But I want to remind you that in the past decade, we have seen a Congress government in Delhi file an FIR against the famous writer Arundhati Roy for speaking about Azadi for Kashmir in a seminar in Delhi. She didn't advocate violence. You don't have to agree with her view. I'm sure most people in this room don't agree with her view. But, as I said, Supreme Court jurisprudence, High Court jurisprudence is very, very clear. It's not as if Delhi police doesn't know this. It's not as if the Home Minister of the then Congress government is unaware of what sedition constitutes as per Supreme Court rulings. But this knee-jerk response to treating any speech that you don't like as an act of sedition ended up making India a laughingstock in the world by leading to a court case against one of our most celebrated writers for sedition, a case which finally the government was forced to withdraw. Or what about the other example? Again, Congress government in Maharashtra, when a cartoonist, Asim Trivedi, a young cartoonist, if we're speaking strictly in aesthetic terms, not a cartoonist whose cartoons I found very funny, but he has the right to draw his cartoons. He drew cartoons about lampooning politicians, lampooning the symbols of the Indian state in the context of the ongoing Anna Hazare agitation. And the government of Maharashtra didn't like what he was doing, charged him with sedition. In Tamil Nadu, villagers peacefully protesting the nuclear plant at Kudankulam have had sedition cases filed against them. In some cases, those who have been charged are minors and young people. Most recently, the folk singer Kovan in Tamil Nadu has been targeted by the Jayalalitha government, again invoking the law of sedition. We are fortunate, of course, that one of the legal monstrosities that was foisted on us by the previous government and sought to be defended by the present government, even though when the BJP was in the opposition, they railed against it, Section 66 of the Information Technology Act, which was a monumental assault on what I call the ideas of India, the ability for people to discuss ideas freely. The IT Act criminalized speech that was made in the online sphere that would not have been considered criminal were it to have been made in a newspaper or on a television show or in a public meeting. What kind of law is that? And you had learned law ministers defending the constitutionality of such a law, both under the previous regime and this one, until finally the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, decided to strike down that section. Of course, this is a Pyrrhic victory, because in the end, a government which wants to clamp down on speech that it does not like, as we can see, always has resort to Section 124A of the IPC, even though invoking it in cases involving just speech represents a gross and complete misuse of that particular provision. But there is a sense in which what we are seeing today is much worse, or represents a dramatic escalation compared to the case of Asim Trivedi, or the case of Arundhati Roy, or the Kudankulam and Kovan cases. The fact that the police, because in those cases, say the case of Asim Trivedi, we don't know by what mysterious processes of law the police decided to go after, and the fact that he has no compunction in publicly taking credit for this, tells us that the intolerance of the government is slowly reaching higher and higher levels. Not satisfied by vilifying the country's top writers and artists and scientists for protesting the state's failure to curb various acts of violence, the Sangh Parivar and its student wing have attempted to strong-arm critics in one way or the other. The attitude of the Sangh towards media freedom can be seen by the way in which senior ministers of the Modi government regularly refer to journalists as bazaru media and prostitutes, invoking the law of sedition for the act of speaking or organizing, or in some cases merely being present at an event, is a direct attack on the right to free speech and the freedom of assembly. What is happening at JNU today is the culmination of what has been happening elsewhere in the country for a longer period of time, but also a culmination of what's been happening elsewhere in the immediate present. Today, the state has sent a promising young student leader, Kanhaiya Kumar, into legal limbo by filing a trumped-up case against him for sedition. Other students, like Umar Khalid and Rama Naga, are now waiting their turn. How quickly we have forgotten the tragic consequences of a similar vendetta against another promising young student, Rohit Vemula. A group of Hyderabad university students wanted to protest the execution of Yaqub Memon. They wanted to show a documentary on the communal violence that took place in Muzaffarnagar. But attempts were made to stop them. Later, we had the intervention of a BJP minister at the center who described these students as anti-national and demanded that there be a curb on this so-called anti-national activity. Striking resonance with what is happening in JNU today. The rest of the Hyderabad story, the tragic end that Rohit Vemula met, is too well known to bear repetition. But what worries me is that those in power, far from being contrite, far from being shamed, far from resolving to change the way they deal with young people in universities, appears to have learned no lesson at all. This talk would be incomplete, and my role as somebody honored with the task of giving this lecture today I would be remiss in my role if I did not spend a few minutes discussing the place and role of the media in our discussion on the ideas of India. It is a matter of great regret to me as a journalist that my own profession, the media, has become a willing accomplice in the stifling of debate in the country. Doctoring tapes, hectoring anchors, sensational but meaningless breaking news have all ended up creating virtual and real lynch mobs, as we saw the kind of lawlessness witnessed in the Patiala House courts. One of the channels showed breaking news the other day of the latest student who is going to be subjected to this kind of low-tech lynching that Kanhaiya Kumar has been subjected to in the last 10 days, Umar Khalid. They said, we have finally accessed his telephone records. The anchor announced in a breathless fashion. And when the reporter was called to provide viewers with what these details were, he said, did you know that the police has discovered that Umar Khalid, in the first 10 days of February, made 800 telephone calls. And of these, 35 calls were to Jammu and Kashmir. And he made several calls to other cities in India. This is held out as guilt. This is held out as breaking news, which is supposed to alarm the public about all kinds of connections, illegal connections that the young women and men, young students of JNU, that allegedly makes them seditious. What kind of a media is it that would choose to become a willing accomplice to this virtual lynching of young students who, in their youthful enthusiasm and folly and vigor, make statements that I'm sure 5 years down the road, they themselves will quite happily disavow. I think the media, the kind of commercial interests that drive it, the kind of political pressures under which they operate and which they quite willingly accept now, has completely shed, certainly a large section of the media has shed the role that the media in any democratic society is meant to play, which is to preserve the space for debate, to preserve the space for dissent, to preserve the space for discussion, to preserve the space for reasoned argument. Evening after evening, fragmentary bits of information are relayed to viewers, and a jury of executioners is assembled, who then proceed to take apart bit by bit young boys and girls who have no way to defend themselves. Young boys and girls who today on the campus of JNU fear the charges that the police are going to lay against them less, because they know that there is eventually a legal light at the end of the tunnel. What they fear more are the murderous mobs that have been summoned by this kind of inflammatory media to the gates of their campus, paying for the blood of students who they don't even know, who are supposed to have committed all kinds of imaginary crimes. This is what students in JNU today fear, and it's entirely the product of inflammatory media coverage that we have seen over the last 10 days. Some kind of introspection by journalists, editors, television anchors is needed if the media is not going to end up hastening the descent towards complete unreason and breakdown of law and order in this country. What makes the tragic incidents at JNU particularly unfortunate is that this attempt to stifle voices of difference, voices of dissent, comes when people across the country are actually are demanding an enlargement of their rights. Different sections of the population are coming face to face with a narrow definition of what India is all about, coming face to face with the cold-hearted, narrow-minded, vicious image of Mother India, the kind of, who was a far cry from the kind of nourishing personality that Indians normally associate with motherhood or with parenthood. Young or not so young men and women across the country, for example, are demanding their right to love whoever they want. And they come face to face against Section 377 because somewhere down the road, politicians who are too timid and too scared to confront religious bigotry, and religious bigots who forget that prior to the arrival of the British, there was never any law in India that criminalized homosexuality. Politicians, so you have ignorant religious bigots, you have timid politicians who perhaps know the reality but are too afraid to act, standing in the way of what around the world is recognized as the fundamental right of an individual to love, to be with whoever they want. If we allow the attack on JNU students in the name of sedition, in the name of confronting anti-national elements to pass, one by one, different sections of the population, there may be homosexuals, there may be Adivasis fighting for their right to their land or the right to the forests. There may be peasants, farmers who don't want to give up their land because they see value in wanting to farm and not to surrender their land at a throwaway price to urban speculators or miners and factory owners and so on. students like in Pune, FTII, fighting for the right to have quality education. Women who are demanding that the state has a fundamental duty to ensure, put an end to violence against women. All of these different sections, or women who want to live life as equals with men and not be crushed by the kind of patriarchal strictures that women across this country deal with every day. If the battle at JNU is lost, if those who believe that those students actually committed sedition are to prevail, the battle for enlarging the rights of every section of population in this country will be imperiled. When I said that India is at an inflection point, I meant that there is a choice we have to now make. And the choice is very simple. I'm not asking any of you to stand on the side of what the JNU students are supposed to have said, or to stand on the side of, or to endorse the struggle of Adivasis when they say that we don't want mining in our lands, or all the other sections who are fighting for the rights. But what we have to endorse is their right to say what they want, to organize themselves peacefully, to allow them to express their vision and their views about what India means, about what Mother India means to them, about what Mother India can do for them and what they can do for Mother India. If we aren't going to allow all of these different sections to voice to give vent to their views and feelings, and then engage in debate, we might as well kiss goodbye to any reasonable, rational notion of the idea of India. To conclude, protecting the democratic tradition of dissent, freedom of speech, plurality of culture, the idea of the ideas of India is the only way that we will ever prosper as a nation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the annual event of PMV Foundations, we generally don't open our talks for discussion, but I think this is a very important issue, and today we will move away a little from our tradition and open this talk for discussion. I had asked Siddhartha as we were driving from the airport, Siddhartha, would you mind taking some questions? And he says, not at all, except I don't mind taking hostile questions, except that it should be done in all civility. And I'm confident that that should not be a problem in this audience. We will take 5 questions to be rounded off with answers in 10 minutes. So please keep your questions absolutely short. No talks in the form of questions.
Can I have a mic?
Do we have a roving mic here? Yes, somebody will take mics. Can I start with the lady here? Yes.
So I actually, I agree with almost all of what you say, but I want to play the devil's advocate and ask you the other side of the coin. Like, I mean, there is a lot of right-wing militia, all this, but I'm beginning to feel there's also a sense of something someone called liberal fascism, that you're not left enough if you don't agree with the left. And it's so difficult to be in the center. I think that's another problem with both the media and with everything. So I just want to have your comments on that.
I think we're going to take all the questions. Just a minute. Hello, excuse me. सुनिए माइक ले लीजिए हाथ में मैं जहाँ बताती हूँ वहाँ देख लीजिएगा Please take the mic back. Please take the mic back. I think you've already taken the mic in your hand. A very short question, please. We'll take all the 5 questions and Siddhartha will answer them together.
Yeah. I would like to have your comment on a statement. The statement is, India is the only country in the world where the majority thinks and acts like a minority. I repeat the statement. India is the only country in the world where the majority thinks and acts like a minority. I'd like a comment.
Hello, thanks so much. I'm a bit puzzled with all that's happening around, and I feel it's all criminal insanity. But what's puzzling me is that when we had such a huge attack on the strategic military base Pathankot, and I term that as most seditious act by those people, and all the intelligence also is very clear that the insiders have joined and have done that. And till now the country doesn't know who has done that. There are no arrests at all. And here on Kanhaiya Kumar, innocent Kanhaiya, we have an arrest without any evidence as such. So this is something that I want to comment upon, and why nobody is asking this question. And I am very proud to be in this country where I in fact, Islam and India, these two were so familiar to me, and I feel that I got all my rights, and we can take all our rights under the Constitution.
Okay, we got your question. Now, two more questions. The gentleman standing here and Vijay from there. That's it.
About intolerance. When intolerance happened, we forgot about everything that happened before that. Why is the media not able to frame all of these in a single sort of debate or discussion that could talk about all of these issues put together?
Vijay, can you ask a question, and that makes it 5 questions.
You began by asking us whether we were surprised that we used the plural for ideas. In fact, I was surprised that you did not use the plural also for Indians. So would you use, India's?
Thank you. Excellent questions. I wouldn't have expected anything less. I will take them in the order in which they were asked and try to wrap up in 10 minutes. The question of liberal fascism, isn't that a problem? Of course it is. I think in any situation, if you have people in control, either in the country or in an institution or in an industry or sector, who don't tolerate views that differ from them, or give no space to those who are. I mean, this is part of a wider problem of cliquism, cabalism, which has unfortunately plagued this country for the last 70 years. And there is no question that wherever, for example, the left has been in power, for example, in West Bengal, it's not as if you've had a very, very thriving intellectual climate over there either. So there is no question that intolerance comes in all varieties and forms, and we should be equally aware of them. My only difference with you perhaps would be that I'm not a big fan of, or I don't think it's very like an intellectual argument to draw comparisons with this, the sense that like when you say Gujarat riots so bad, instead of somebody debating and arguing on that, they say no, but what about 84? And when we say okay, 84 is bad, they say, but the Congress fellows will say, but you don't talk about what Sangh Parivar did somewhere else. So this constant shifting of arena or terrain, pointing fingers at bad activities of somebody else, in my view, as an intellectual exercise, takes us only so far. And the lesson in all of this is that it's important, if we cherish freedom, if we are truly liberal, then we should not be worried about calling a spade, no matter who wields that spade. And I certainly believe in my writing and in my activity in doing so, and I think that there is much greater credibility. And when people frame it that way, and I would say that when problems are framed in that manner, it becomes that much harder for those who defend one or the other act of criminality to get away with it. I was invited to deliver the Zakir Hussain Memorial Lecture at Zakir Hussain College last year, and the topic I chose was 1984, 1984, 1990, 2000. The Delhi genocide of 6, the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits from J&K, and the massacre of Muslims in Gujarat. And I said all these 3 events are part of the continuum. For heaven's sake, don't try to separate the victims of these 3 and make them argue and fight with each other. So it's essential that we be even-handed. It's essential that we not allow one's own, politics or ideology to color our perception of where intolerance has arisen or where fascism, quote unquote, is manifesting itself. Your question, sir, India is the only country in the world where the majority acts as minority. You're right, but I'm afraid India may not, it's perhaps no longer the only country in the world. I was looking at statistics of European demography, where, for example, in the Nordic countries, refugees are 0.02% of the total population of, say, Denmark. But Danish right-wing parties feel under siege, and they promote the idea that Denmark is going to be awash with Syrian refugees. So unfortunately, right-wing politicians cater to and play on this idea of the fact that our culture is going to be swamped, we're going to be under threat, even though, by any yardstick, demographic terms, there is no reason for these majorities to think of themselves as minorities. But in India, this is a peculiar problem. And I would say that the entire politics of the Hindutva lobby, as it were, or the Hindutva groups, is centered around this idea of turning, appealing to making Hindus feel vulnerable, making them feel small, making them feel put upon. This has absolutely no basis in statistics or political reality, but it's a goal that they pursue simply because what they have to offer by way of solutions to the problems that these Hindus face actually is nothing much, right? The last election was fought not in the name of Hinduism, right? It was fought in the name of giving 10 million jobs a year. It was fought in the name of bringing black money back. It was fought in the name of giving a future to every young boy and girl in this country. And 18 months or 2 years down the road, if not much headway has been made in fulfilling those goals, it shouldn't surprise us if those who made those promises are now seeking recourse in stoking fears, stoking vulnerabilities among these people. So that, and I think what's happened in JNU is a classic case of this. Part of it is incompetence on the part of the police, on the part of the Home Minister. I mean, a Home Minister who can mistake a parody, a tweet from an account which is marked on Twitter, parody account. Can mistake that for the actual Hafiz Saeed tweeting. Quite apart from not understanding as a senior politician what the politics of CPI is and how can CPI, CPI, with due apologies to any CPI member in the audience, CPI has been so loyal to the Indian state that this party supported the emergency. So the Home Minister of this country to imagine, and one of Mr. Raja Singh's predecessors was Indrajit Gupta, who's a CPI member. So to even believe for a second, even if that tweet was genuine, that Kanhaiya Kumar could somehow be connected to Lashkar-e-Taiba is absurd. So incompetence has played its role. But I dare say there is an idea also that we don't want institutions. I mentioned institutions at the start of my talk. We don't want institutions where there's free thinking to take hold, and stoking hyper nationalism. And I come to the question on Pathankot that the young woman asked in the corner. You're absolutely right. These are those who invoke the idea of an India under danger, India under threat, are actually doing very little in concrete terms to deal with those threats. So where the threat comes from is ignored, where the threat doesn't come from, you're focusing all your energies. I already mentioned the difference between what happened in JNU and what happened outside Patiala courts. If the government of India cannot secure a court complex which is hardly a couple of kilometers from Raisina Hill, which is the seat of power, you can imagine what the fate of Pathankot and all these other bases will be. So I think that the state, those who talk in terms of hard state, those who talk in terms of defending Bharat Mata, need to actually, and you cannot, on the one hand, as some of the media has done, contrast the sacrifice of the brave soldiers who died in Siachen in that avalanche. It's despicable to use the sacrifice of those soldiers against the JNU students. But the same politicians who encouraged this kind of comparison had no compunction in ordering a lathi charge against veterans who were demanding one rank, one pension. So, soldiers also are finding out that the government is quite willing to celebrate their death and use their death, but it pays very little attention to their living conditions and their working conditions while alive. So I think the question that you raise is very valid, and I would say that one part of the JNU, the reason why this fracas is getting prolonged and is going to get more and more complicated is that it serves as a wonderful diversion from the kind of questions that you are raising or the kind of questions that people in this audience have about the performance or the delivery of on promises that were made at the time of the election. The question of memories being short, I thought what I tried to do today was to weave together the intricate connection between Rohit, Kanhaiya, intolerance, and to actually trace its genealogy, because I want all of you in this room to not go away with this idea that this is just a BJP or a Modi thing. Please understand that this attack on dissent, this intolerance towards difference, has a long and problematic past in this country. You can trace it back to 47 actually, but in its increasingly virulent form, certainly over the last decade, one manifestation of that is also the growing intolerance in civil society of different sections. People who object to a movie because it has some kind of a comic reference to your caste or your religion. People who object to an art exhibition, to books, to comics, to plays. So this is definitely part of the. These are the more disturbing weaves that have emerged in the fabric of India. The media doesn't connect them for the very simple reason that the media has become or is becoming increasingly irresponsible. And as I said, the media, far from playing the role that people envisaged at one point, I'm not very fond of this idea of fourth pillar and so on, but insofar as the media revels in that idea that we are the fourth pillar, the media's role has become so different from that and so far removed from the idea of speaking truth to power that don't expect them to make those connections. I think it's important that young people like yourself make use of tools that you have available, that technology has given, social media and so on and so forth. You now have a way to raise your voice that no government, no university vice chancellor can suppress. There's no scope of short-circuiting a discussion on campus, because you can always resort to Facebook or Twitter or any other forms of communication. Use those channels that are available to you, because the debate that you can then generate, I think that is something which will push reasoned discourse in society much more than what mainstream media today is likely to do. And so the last point, plural for India, plural, I spoke of ideas of India, one of ideas of India's. Well, there's many different ways in which we can think of this, right? The fact that there are many Indias is at one level a common stance. It's a banalism, if I can coin a new word. Politicians love to say, for example, there is India, Bharat. Well, that's two Indias for you. We can think of India in purely territorial terms. We can think of India in philosophical terms. We can think of India in moral terms. My own preference is to, the reason I emphasize the notion of idea or ideas is because at one level, we are not a unique nation. We aren't a unique people. We may have come up with a zero, but lots of other peoples around the world have invented lots of other fabulous things. And this false pride that we are somehow special, a bit like the American chauvinists who think of themselves as the indispensable nation. So India is one of many other countries, and I think the ideas that we have they're not unique to India. Maybe the form of expression is different, but I would like to think that the values that we stand for and we aspire to and we champion are similar to the values and aspirations and dreams and aims of people in Bolivia, or people in Cameroon, or people in France. Because at the end of the day, these are human values, these are human virtues, these are human rights that we talk about and that we all aspire to. So in some sense, I am echoing the notion of, to borrow a line from our esteemed Prime Minister in his Parliament speech, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, for example. These are all, these are ideas, these are thoughts that belong to the whole of mankind. It's not India alone that necessarily thinks in those terms. So my sense is the reason I focus on ideas is that these are ideas which belong to everybody. If they're good ideas from elsewhere, we should certainly emulate and borrow them. Nepal, for example, country that we like to consider ourselves superior to, has a constitution whose definition of rights when it comes to, say, homosexuality or the rights of farmers is in many ways far more advanced than the Constitution of India. South Africa, which came to freedom much later than India, has a constitution which gives, to my mind, greater private place to the different languages that people speak. Telugu, for example, is recognized and is used for a lot of official business in South Africa. There are lots of things that we can. When I had a chance to go to Ethiopia about 7-8 years ago and listen to a session of their parliament, I was amazed that this was when Manmohan Singh went and addressed the Ethiopian parliament. I was amazed that the speech of Manmohan Singh was, there was simultaneous translation in the Ethiopian parliament in 9 languages, languages spoken by different ethnic groups in Ethiopia. We'd be lucky if we could have such a facility available all the time in the Parliament of India. So there are lots of ideas and practices that we need to imbibe from the rest of the world, just as there are undoubtedly things that we can teach. But unless we have a culture of debating, unless we stop this insane and monstrous finger-pointing, name-calling, issuing certificates of nationalism and patriotism to each other, questioning the credentials and motives of somebody who has a question, unless we stop that, none of these ideas will have any value.